In my experience, I found the toughest time was a few months, maybe a year down the road when you didn't have all that like constant chatter with your friends about, the good times and the memories and all that. It was the times when you were lonely, when you were kind of deep in your thought, and you didn't have that anymore. So I think a very important thing as a friend who knows anyone that is going through an experience where they lost a friend, or maybe doesn't even have to be that extreme, but is being there consistently and over an extended time period.
Welcome to TAD Voices. I'm Nick.
And I'm Lawson, and we're friends and former teammates who are here to talk about mental health.
We are by no means experts in this field, nor is this a substitute for professional help, but we can promise open and vulnerable conversations that highlight the strength of some amazing people who have decided to share their story with us.
Talk, share, help. And thanks for listening. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so excited to bring you today's guest. Born in Ridgewood, New Jersey, he is the Chief Operating Officer of Talk About Depression, having helped Ben grow TAD's platform from its inception. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend you check out his incredibly powerful story on our website. Jack is a 2019 graduate of Hobart College, where he captained their men's hockey team to a 2019 national semifinal, and is also an alumni of the East Coast Hockey League, where he played professionally last year. A fan favorite wherever he goes, he's a natural-born leader with one of the best smiles in the game. Our very good friend, Mr. Jack Macnee. Jack, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited.
Jack, how's it going, man? What have you been up to?
Just a lot of remote work, trying to get outside, be active. I actually went through a surgery a couple months ago on my wrist, so doing some physical therapy for that, and just working, doing some stuff on TAD, trying to get the ball rolling a bit more. So it's been good.
There you go. Way to lead me in for the first question. I think jumping right into it, you want to take us through how you initially got involved with TAD and helping Ben sort of grow this thing?
Yeah. So my involvement in TAD basically goes back to an experience I had, and this is written in my story that is published on the website. And I had remembered that Ben had been starting TAD and was working on getting the business going and trying to find a path for it. And a few months after he had really proposed the idea to me and some other friends and teammates, I went through an experience with a friend who actually took his own life. And in my initial reaction and the shock I reached out to Ben because I knew he was knowledgeable in mental health field, and he might have some good advice for me on how to cope with it. And one thing kind of led to the next, and I think a bit of a coping mechanism in itself was me joining TAD. And the motivation was, I don't want anyone else to have to go through the experience I had, and I want to help find a way to get friends to care faster and more accessible way.
The one thing that we're kind of all about here is, acknowledging how powerful these stories are when people are willing to kind of to speak out and share them with the world. So just right off the bat, we thank you for that. Just kind of getting into it a little bit more, take us through in a little more depth, how you heard about your friend's passing and kind of what that moment was like for you.
Yes. So that moment is one that I'll never forget. And it's quite traumatizing, honestly, but talking about it helps. And I'll never forget the moment I had a phone call out of the blue from a friend that you usually just receive a text from. It was the middle of the day, on a weekday. I was in and out of class, and it was quite rare to be getting a call like that. And I remember him crying hysterically and couldn't really get any words out. And immediately you knew something was up. And he broke the news to me and said he didn't believe it. And someone had told him that it happened. And I was like completely thrown off. I in that moment, I really couldn't understand what was going on. And then, it starts to set in, and you're really just in this extreme state of shock where you have no idea what to think. You don't want to believe it. You start calling around, and slowly you start to realize that it is true. And like I said, I really just had no idea what to do. I started packing my clothes, got in the car, and drove straight home. And I think one of the incredible things in this experience was, thinking back, was how quickly my friends from really spread out across the country at different universities all gathered within 6 or 7 hours back in our hometown in New Jersey. So it was a pretty special thing. And it was great to have such good friends that were there for each other so quickly. But that was the initial feeling and reaction that I had.
Jack, you used a term before when you were describing TAD, and you said, I want friends to, I think you used the word care. I may be wrong, but, maybe notice things a little earlier.
Yeah.
Did you have any moments when you sort of felt like, looking back on it, like, oh, that was sort of a warning sign, or looking back on it?
I did. I think in this particular case, this was a friend who was extremely outgoing. He was, a bit of the class clown, I guess. And, he never wanted anyone to know that he was having these issues, or he never wanted to bring the mood down. And in fact, he always wanted to bring it up. He was always, cracking jokes and all that. So the signs weren't as present as they are in some other cases, I think, but there were definitely some signs. And I think one of the first things that anyone who's close to someone who takes their own life starts to do is they start to really take a deep dive into those moments they were with their friend last, and those experiences, and almost looking for signs. And when I did that, I was like, okay, yeah, that was definitely a sign. And maybe I picked up on it, but didn't think about it enough. And I think it's a good point to bring up, because it is something that's difficult to really unpack and understand what those signs are and how they can be different for each case or each person, right? Because everybody handles their mental illness or whatever they're going through a little bit differently.
I think what's probably, what's so valuable about your story, and as you shared it, what you can see is that there's, mental illness, there's not one uniform thing that it looks like. It takes on different forms, and somebody who you might not necessarily expect to be struggling could kind of be, have their own internal struggles, right?
Yeah, and I think something that came out of it for me personally is understanding, one, that most people at one stage in their life, at the very least, go through some sort of depression or deal with something, and it's really, it shouldn't be looked at as an issue that is specific to certain people who really go through these like extreme episodes, or in some cases that lead to suicide. I think the conversation needs to be, at some point in your life you're likely to experience some part of mental struggles, and that might not be that severe, but I think it's pretty common to see people look at depression as a very negative thing, and really it should be more of a conversation as, okay, so I'm dealing with this, and it's better for me to just talk about it and find a way to solve it. And that might be done internally, that might be done with friends and family, that might be done professionally, but I think it's just so important that we finally get to a point where you can look yourself in the mirror and know that you can accept whatever it is you're dealing with and go from there and find the best solution. And I think for me, I finally, even in the past like year or so, have accepted some of my own internal struggles. And with my involvement in TAD, it's just been so much healthier for me to handle those like head on. And personally, I struggle with sleeping sometimes. I don't know if you would call it insomnia, but for whatever reason, all that anxiety boils up and comes out when I turn the lights off. And I think that I finally accepted that. And once I did that and I was honest with myself, I could find solutions. So it's a big thing that we want to solve at TAD is, okay, how do we let people know, one, that it's okay? And how do we give people the resources to get that help they need specific to what they need?
Maybe bring us through how, TAD would have been helpful to you in your crisis moment, but also sort of take us through like where do you see TAD going? How big of an impact do you see TAD having on sort of the general population?
Yeah, I think in the experience I had with my friend, it definitely would have been great for those that were in more constant communication with him to have had a resource like TAD. So this was a friend that I was quite close to. We went to high school together. We lived next to each other at boarding school. We grew up playing lacrosse together. So I knew him for a long time, but I wasn't as close as a couple other guys might have been. And these were guys who were talking to him every day. And I'm sure the signs were much more present for them. And I think that if they knew they had a resource like TAD, where they could somewhat remove themselves and they knew they were putting their friend in touch with the right professionals or right resources, that would have been a great resource. And, going off of that, what do I think TAD will become? I think the overall goal of TAD is to help people access care more efficiently, more easily, and that's the right care. And the first step for us is creating this crisis tool where a friend goes online and TAD is the destination. It is the landing page for, okay, I'm in a situation. I have a friend or family member that is going through some serious issues, and I need to get them help. Where do I go? And we are that like emergency first stop resource. And I don't think TAD stops there. It is going to be the brand that people think of when they want to help get care for loved ones, friends, whatever it may be.
You kind of touched on it, and I think a really important aspect of TAD is that it's that kind of the intimidation factor, and right, we're trying to kind of almost remove that from the equation and create a space where it's easier in moments of crisis, because sometimes it can be difficult. Like even you just think of calling a crisis hotline, like that's something that's not easy to do for a lot of people, and it's something that is extremely intimidating. So having like this kind of a resource online, I think is something that's going to be very helpful for a lot of people. And I'll kind of stay on this topic of TAD, but do you think there's any hurdles in the near future that you see posing kind of obstacles to TAD?
So I think the biggest hurdles for TAD is in this build out of this crisis tool initially is obviously first and foremost is fundraising. We don't have the funds yet to get us there. and to build out the tool that we want to build. And we don't want to do it cheaply. We want this to be well done. And the features that we want to integrate into the platform itself, we want those to be well done, and they're expensive. So we are taking our time right now. We're not rushing anything. I think we want this to be done the best way possible. So we're really just focused right now on, growing our network, finding different methods of fundraising, whether that be grants or through big sponsorship. And we're really just looking for the right partners to get this build out moving. Like I said, we're not trying to rush anything. It's not going to happen overnight. I think our CEO, Ben, is a great big picture thinker, and we're not too caught up right now in like getting that product, or I guess getting the platform out right away. We're thinking more big picture as TAD as a brand. And we really want to grow this social side of our brand, where it's a safe space for people to go. I think we want to continue to grow these stories on our website to let people know that they're not alone. And then hopefully once we have this tool built, this crisis tool, we can say, well, okay, you're not alone, and here are the resources. This is where you need to go to get help. So kind of like an all-in-one place for anyone that's dealing with mental illness themselves, or know someone who is. It's just a really important landing page for someone to have.
That's awesome. And I think I'd like to take a little bit of a step back, and for somebody who, if I remember correctly, you're a younger guy that came in, what advice would you give 18, 19-year-old Jack entering college as a male hockey player around mental health? And would that inform any behavior changes, you think?
Absolutely. I think through the experience I had, and just my involvement in TAD, and learning about mental health and how important it is, I rank it ahead of physical health. There's no question. And I think that's the point we need to get to. And advice for really any athlete, especially in those high school, college years, you're in such a competitive environment at all times. And that's not going to change. The beauty of sports is competition, right? But I just think it's really important to be able to step back and think about your mental health and your mental state as an athlete, because the rigors of athletics in that competition can really bear down on you. And actually in my previous year of hockey, playing professionally, I had some moments where I was really down in the dumps, and I think my involvement in TAD allowed me to kind of navigate that and be honest with myself. In college, I would say that I was in a pretty good spot athletically, in terms of me often being a regular player in the lineup every night and having a big role on the team, which is great. So it was a bit of an adjustment for me to jump to the professional level in a pretty competitive league where I wasn't playing as big of a role anymore. And it had been a long time since I hadn't been in the lineup for a game one night, and there were consecutive games, days, weeks where I wasn't playing and I was watching from the stands. And I just think it was so valuable for me to still have a good head on my shoulders, like mentally, and be able to assess the situation and think big picture and really focus on my mental health through that, because it wasn't easy. And all athletes go through this, I think, at one point or another. It's not easy, and it's just, it is so vital to have the ability to understand what really is important.
Now, I know professionally it's a little bit different, and I hope at Hobart that, when we were there that people, you know, who were going through things had outlets to talk. But what would you say the locker room situation was like for you last year? Were you able, other than TAD, were you able to reach out to any teammates or coaches or, you know?
Yeah, I actually had a great experience with teammates. I thought maybe professionally I wouldn't have those bonding moments. I made some great friends this past year professionally, and there were guys I absolutely could go to and talk to about this stuff, which was great for me. And hopefully everybody has that experience, but I'm sure that there are scenarios in which you don't have those outlets, which can be difficult.
I mean, you're alluding to how TAD's kind of helped you in your, you know, with your own experiences and kind of on your own journey. But, you know, I guess kind of what I want to ask you is, do you think it would have been easy for you to grieve, you know, the loss of your friend if you hadn't had this kind of outlet to really make a difference and try to make some positive change?
Yeah, and I think I mentioned before that TAD almost served as a coping mechanism for me. I think the day that I heard the news, I reached out to Ben within a few hours, and you know, we talked every day from there on out for a long time. And that's really what did it for me is knowing how invested Ben really is in TAD and how much he genuinely cares. And that really showed me the opportunity that we had at TAD, because we have a leader who is so invested in this and really cares about this. And I think it really helped me get through my struggles, just having Ben to work on this with, and just doing my research on mental health and suicide. And then I even did a project my senior year. I did an independent study where I did a data analysis project where I was basically looking at suicide rates across the U.S. over many different years and the factors going into that, and even looked a little bit more specifically at athletes and how, you know, it's different between the Division I, Division II, Division III levels. And there's so much data and statistics out there, and for me, all of that, all of the work and time I was putting into TAD, I think helped me get over the loss of my friend. And I shouldn't say get over it, because you never really will fully get over it, but learn how to at least cope with it.
So much of what TAD is it's friends helping friends, right? You mentioned kind of in your own healing process just how valuable it was. 'Cause we were roommates at the time, right? And I can remember you taking off for a few days or whatever it was, but you know how valuable it was to you to reunite with your friends, to see, you know, the impact that your friend had on the lives of so many individuals, right? And the positive, you know,
Yeah.
kind of the positive impact he
Yeah.
had as
No,
well. So
it was special. And I think friends and family are the most important resources when coping with a loss of a friend or, you know, family member, whoever it may be. So yeah, it was great to have those guys to bond with and share the good memories and the laughs. I mean, it was a roller coaster, really. I mean, the ups and downs of emotions just flowing, and you're in such like a vulnerable state. I don't think I've ever been so vulnerable in those first few days when I really was just letting it all out, because it puts things into perspective. And I think, you know, I realize how fortunate I am to have the friends I have who are looking out for each other like they do. So that was another learning experience that came out of it. And just recently, unfortunately, a friend of mine lost a friend of his that he lived with and went to school with, and just been talking to him as a resource for him, and just trying to be the same friend for him that all of these guys were to me when I went through my experience.
I think that's awesome. And, you know, for me, I think Lawson and I have talked about this a little bit, but, obviously these moments are going to be something that individuals remember for the rest of their lives, right? But I don't think that you're defined by that moment. And I want to, applaud you for all the great work that you've done. And you've really, reflected on a moment and understood it. And I could hear it in your voice and, know that you were deeply affected by it. But I think the work that you've done at TAD and just the vision that you have for this and your enthusiasm towards it, I mean, I'm really proud of you.
Appreciate that. And the one thing I will say, and just for our listeners to hear, is that being there for somebody or being a good friend when anybody is going through a crisis situation or after the loss of a friend or whatever it may be, it is really being there past that crisis moment. So I think at TAD, what we want to do with this tool is have this crisis tool where you get emergency help or you know where to go, but it really goes like much deeper and much further down the road than that. And what I mean by that is that in my experience, I found the toughest time was a few months, maybe a year down the road, when you didn't have all that like constant chatter with your friends about the good times and the memories and all that. It was the times when you were lonely, when you were kind of deep in your thought, and you didn't have that anymore. So I think a very important thing as a friend who knows anyone that is going through an experience where they lost a friend, or maybe doesn't even have to be that extreme, but is being there consistently and over an extended time period, because it's just so important that doesn't die out. And it even just checking in on someone, it doesn't need to be a phone, even just a little text, hey, how you doing? Or are you doing all right? Just checking in on you. People appreciate that so much, and it takes 2 seconds to send a quick text, and it goes such a long way. I know for me, when I had people reaching out to me about the loss of my friend who I haven't spoken to in years, and then a couple months down the road, they'd shoot me another text maybe and say, hey, how you doing? By the way, like, thinking about you. And like, that just means like so much to the individual to get a message like that. So I just think that's a really important thing for our listeners.
Yeah. And I think that's something, we're hoping that everybody does. And we urge people to do that because, like you said, it can be such like an uplifting experience, right? Just to see your phone light up sometimes when you might feel like, you're alone with your thoughts, and just to know that somebody out there is kind of thinking of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
kind of, one more thing I'll just kind of add to finish up here. But I think for a lot of us, it's important to, even whether or not you've had an experience, if it was a friend, a family member, a loved one, and you've had a close personal experience with suicide or depression, I think a lot of times those moments can kind of, they can make you empathetic, a little bit more empathetic to the situations of others. And maybe, you understand and you value the importance of reaching out to others after, you've kind of gone through those experiences. But one thing I'll say is that, even if you necessarily haven't gone through something like that, like if you can actively see the benefit of reaching out to somebody, like even before.
I think that's like, it's one of the big aspects of TAD, is like getting to a point with mental health where it's like everybody's on the same page. Like, hey, this is really important, and we need to be checking in on each other. We need to be there for each other, and we need to find a way to help each other get the care they need when they need it, because oftentimes, unfortunately, it's too late. And like a quick text to anyone that might be dealing with something directly or indirectly, or just checking in on people, really, like it's just so valuable and it's so easy. And like you said, you don't need to go through a personal experience like I have to understand that. So I think that's a big message we want to get through.
Well, Jack, again, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast and reiterate,
Yeah.
Just how great it is to be working with you, on a daily, weekly basis here at TAD. And, thanks again for coming on and sharing your story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited to see where this podcast is headed. And, it's great to be working on something like this with you guys. So, same goes to you guys. Appreciate it. And thanks so much for having me on.